Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's 5:30, the witching hour, or bewitching hour. Hey, Mark. Welcome to the Town of Barnstable Local Comprehensive Planning Committee meeting on December 14th, 5:30 p.m., prompt start. And I am going to call the meeting to order, and I'm going to ask for roll call. Just say here or present if you hear your name. Amanda Converse, Lindsay Council, Mark Hansen.
Present, thank you.
Megan Mort, Wendy Northcross, present. Francis Parks, Cheryl Powell.
I am here, and I also extend apologies that I have to leave early tonight.
Thank you, Cheryl. Avery Revere. Here. Sue Rohrbach. Robert Twiss.
Evening, Bob Twiss.
Hey, Bob. Jennifer Williams.
Here.
Alyssa Chase.
Present.
Katya DeCuna. Is she still away? And Asia Graves.
Here.
Okay, thank you. We have a notice of recording that I just need to make public. The meeting will be televised via Xfinity Channel 8 or High Definition Channel 1072. It may also be accessed via Government Access Channel live stream on the Town of Barnstable's website. And in accordance with Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, the committee must inquire whether anyone is taping this meeting and to please make their presence known. No taping. Thank you. So, first order of business, I would like to approve the minutes of the November 30th meeting. Do we have a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Cheryl Powell. Second?
Second.
Okay.
I think we have to acknowledge that there's updated minutes that are
Well,
all in
so
our hands.
So we have a motion on the floor, and this is where you can say, we have amendments that you'd like to add to the minutes.
Okay. I have amendments to the minutes.
And I think we have a blue-lined copy in front of us. Is that correct, Avery?
That's correct.
As clerk,
And
you're the keeper of the minutes.
and basically, a lot of it is defining acronyms, as well as referring to the Association to Preserve Cape Cod's Grow Smart initiative. There's an update on one of my comments to be sure we're including Barnstable fire districts when we're talking about fire districts and development. Again, a Grow Smart, and that's about that.
Okay. Is everyone okay with those amendments to the minutes that were sent out? Okay, great. So all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes have it. Thank you. Okay, right to business. Topics for discussion today include a discussion and review of the land use chapter, including issues, opportunities, policies, and strategies. And Kate is going to give us an overview. We will then go into an introduction of the housing chapter, and I think we're going to have some cool off-the-camera focus groups again this meeting, right? Go ahead, Kate.
Good evening, committee. Kate Maldonado, senior planner. For tonight's agenda, as Wendy has presented, we'll continue our conversation on the land use chapter. I want to quickly reflect on what we discussed at the last meeting, issues and opportunities for land use, and then we will dive into a breakout exercise where we will focus on policies, suggested policies and strategies for the land use chapter, and then we'll end this meeting with a presentation with an introduction of the housing production plan. You received in your packet tonight and via email last week, also available online for members of the public, the draft land use chapter. Certainly we can look more closely at the language in that chapter and you can provide any comments that you have. But for this evening, we're going to focus on the suggested draft policies and strategies for the land use chapter, and particularly focusing on these broad areas across town and thinking about policies and strategies as allocated geographically across the town of Barnstable. Quickly, I just wanted to provide a summary of what we discussed last week as we work thinking about these issues and opportunities to finalize ideas for policies and strategies for land use. So at the last meeting, we heard during the breakout groups, there's a need to plan for the future, thinking about sewer infrastructure and the idea of preservation versus development and creating a balance as we look at future sewer infrastructure. And there was even mention of the wind infrastructure as well. We talked about what future housing development should look like. We want to make sure that there's open space, connectivity, transportation among the housing developments, that there's walkable, I think it was referred to as town-centered development, and making sure that there's mixed use, so that there's retail, there's access to our services too with our housing, so that housing doesn't stand alone as an island, that it has integration of all of these elements for a whole neighborhood. We talked about opportunities for where housing could be located, thinking maybe about the village centers at a village scale on the outskirts of our village centers, also as infill on some of our commercial nodes, such as Route 28, and maybe second story and some of our existing commercial centers. We also talked about, as the future housing development is to occur, we want to make sure that it's developed to a design and scale that's appropriate for the location. So thinking about not just architecture, but site plan as well. So building off those issues and opportunities, tonight the schedule for this evening is we'll have a similar layout as the prior meeting. We'll break out into two groups. We're going to talk about the suggested policies and strategies defined in that draft land use chapter, again, available online. And we're going to work through each of those 6 areas geographically across town. In an interest of everyone's time and to stay efficient, we've targeted about 10 minutes for each of those areas. We have boards behind me with those draft policies and strategies that we'll work through. And then we'll work through all 6 of them. We'll probably have a break because we'll have exercised a lot of time and brain power to go through all of those areas. And then, just as we did last time, we'll ask that members of the committee or staff provide a report out so that there's a discussion of what was heard. And then we'll end with an introduction of the housing production plan. I do want to note that we wanted to make sure that this exercise is accessible for all members of our community. For those members of our public here tonight, all of the boards with the policies and strategies for each of those geographic areas, there's a 8.5 by 11 version that members of the public can provide their comments, and then those comments can be either emailed to the Barnstable LCP email or provided to staff in person here at Town Hall. For members of the public who are participating remotely, this packet with all that information, the draft suggested policies and strategies for those geographical areas, is with the meeting materials for this meeting. So if you went to the project website, barnstablelcp.com, the document library, and then clicked on the meeting materials for this meeting, you can also engage and similarly provide your comments via email or drop them off in person to members of staff. So with that, I think we will break up into 2 groups. We do have refreshments this evening too, and we welcome you to look around. Each of the 6 boards are presented, so that way as you look around, you can see some of the ideas as presented in the draft chapter, but get an idea, and then we'll break up into the groups and start those 10-minute exercises. So we'll be looking at both the text of the strategies and policies. Again, all of that is coming from the feedback that we received at the last meeting. So thinking about, does the text meet what we're trying to achieve? And then we also have maps as well. So as we're thinking about open space in certain areas and other strategies, we can be marking them up on the maps too. Any questions or comments? Okay, thank you.
We're good to go. Thanks.
with that. We can divide up into two parties. Maybe, Wendy, you get to choose as chair, and then 4 and 4 on either side. And it's a small group. I think the public is certainly welcome to join us at the tables as well. Yes, handouts at the side table as well.
You guys almost done over there?
We spent a lot of time in Hyannis, actually. And then I think for me, the most interesting is the whole, the DJ area and the upshot list that has to be planned. You just really have to get the plans up to. And the planning board person.
Okay, are we ready to report out? Miss Kate?
Okay, all right. Thank you all for joining us in that breakout group. So we'd like to report back what we heard. I'm going to report back from my group, but certainly please interject if I'm missing anything. I think as a whole, we walked through all of these policies and strategies for these 6 geographical areas across town. I think there was consensus and support with the drafts. I think they related to the conversations that we had at the last meeting about issues and opportunities. But we had some comments about some of the language and they're expanding upon it and also expanding on some opportunities to enhance these strategies as well. So we'll walk through each of them. Do you mind actually? Sorry. Just so I can see over. Yeah, okay. I'm going to look back and forth. Okay, so we'll start with the residential rural area. So certainly this encompasses a large portion of Barnstable as a whole. So one of, in addition to the strategies here, we also talked about maybe incentivizing smaller businesses within these areas. The town did recently amend our home occupation ordinance, which allowed for more small businesses, and that's something that this group felt in support of. We also felt that in this geographic area, there should be more requirements for planting more trees. Seeking a variety of different housing types, not just single family, but the composition of housing as well to allow that in this area. We got into thinking about some of the requirements that could help support as we're thinking about the future with resiliency and specifications for lots. So thinking about FAR, that floor area ratio, that calculation of area divided by your lot area. So maybe we can enhance restrictions for FAR so that larger developments are prohibited or reduced in strategic areas. So thinking about FAR as well as our lot coverage calculations and using those as tools in areas strategically where we want to limit the amount of development. I think that speaks to the residential and rural. Maritime, specifically starting with the policy statement to preserve and protect our waterfronts and harbors. We want to expand upon that. So also thinking about how education plays a role with our maritime, so people support and value aspects of town, especially maritime when they're more educated. And appreciation aligns with having more education of those benefits of our maritime. Thinking more of what are we protecting when we say preserve and protect. The protecting, we talked about protecting from overdevelopment in our maritime areas, and we want to make sure that we maintain access to the water. So access both for fishermen, for people of all ages, to our students, our residents, and making sure that there's access to the water. One of the strategies focuses on a zoning amendment to restrict views to ensure that we maintain views of the water. And so we got into a conversation a little bit further of what does that mean to preserve the existing views? How do we restrict that? Furthermore, thinking about like composition of trees, landscape on the property, and sorry, I can't read my own handwriting. Sorry. Yeah. So. Further elaborating what that scope of view means, if it's architecture, if it's trees, so that we have clarity on that. We want to make sure that in the maritime areas that we're promoting and supporting our blue economy and the education that plays a role with blue economy, access. And making sure that when we're talking about any sort of zoning amendments for buildings that in our maritime areas that they're built considering resiliency and potential need for retreat in the future. Downtown Hyannis, I think there was a lot of consensus for the policy as written. We felt like some of the language where it talks about placemaking specifically, some of the language could be further defined. So what does placemaking mean? Providing variety of places for people, it's not just cars. And that dovetailed into our larger conversation of what's Hyannis missing. And we really spoke to amenities, so services, like your like a market, a movie theater, so services as well as amenities and activities. That's something that when we're thinking about what the future should be, in addition to incentivizing open space and recreation, we also want to have a variety, there was consensus from the group to have a variety of amenities, movie theaters, markets, places that you could take food home and cook, so more amenities. And then when we're thinking about walkable neighborhoods, making sure that that incorporates safety. So, and that speaks to lighting, making sure that people feel safe when they're walking downtown. And that should be incentivized when new development comes forward, that's part of the standards that they need to meet. Yeah, I think that summarizes that. Commercial nodes, so this is West Main Street, Route 28, some areas near our Cape Cod Mall. So, and we felt it was discussed that there's a lot of opportunity for our commercial areas. I think, there was consensus that agreed with incorporating further housing in our commercial nodes, both as infill development, and providing more housing, a more variety of people. And when we say mixed use, so certainly housing, but making sure that there's commercial and retail too. So there was consensus for more mixed use. One of the strategies already incorporated open space, but there was a lot of consensus to make sure that there's more open space, particularly thinking about the land near the mall. And when we talk about access and circulation, thinking about seniors too, when we're improving circulation in this area, range of housing, both affordable and market rate. Yeah. Thank you, Jen. Regional Economic Center, so this is our Independence Park area. I think we agreed with a lot of the policies and strategies presented. There was definitely walkable connectivity, incorporating both housing and mixed use. There was a desire for incentivizing more jobs, more businesses, and thinking about how people telecommute in the town, how we can market for more jobs and businesses and residents who are telecommuting, and great support for connectivity with future development in this area. And lastly, our village centers. We looked at the policy a little bit more closely, thinking about it defines historic context and what does historic mean. So we want to expand upon what historic means and also add in, so this is talking about development should focus on walkable and walkability in mixed use areas in a historic context, and also incorporate transit as well in our village centers and more activities. But I think incorporating activities and walkability was a great takeaway, and safety as well. And with connectivity and mixed use, making sure spaces for daily needs. That was a quick summary, just looking back at notes, but certainly if any of the members of that group wanted to report on anything else that was mentioned.
All right, I will report out for our side, but again, if I missed anything or used the wrong words, please interrupt me. Maritime areas, we talked a lot about the opportunity to potentially concentrate additional activity on those waterfronts to economically enhance what is happening there, to preserve and actively support our water-based and maritime uses. So we talked about all the great opportunities that are there, like maritime museums, our fishing charters, and a variety of other uses that are there today. How do we proactively support our commercial fishing fleet and create economically vibrant and productive waterfronts, incorporating new uses, places where commercial fishermen can sell their catch, like a fish market or waterfront restaurants, making sure to be careful not to block any water views, but really thinking about the highest and best use of those waterfront areas, which may not necessarily be surface parking. And certainly we looked at, as an example of this, Fisherman's View in Sandwich, which incorporates, again, those museums, walking, biking amenities, restaurants, as a good model for concentrating activity on our waterfront. Good. Residential and rural areas, sort of some questions about whether the boards were reflecting the right strategies relative to agricultural lands. If we were going to look at a higher minimum lot size, really, what would be the justification of that? Are we tying it to specific areas that have agricultural potential? And we really talked a lot about how to sort of the changing nature of agricultural agriculture historically and today on the Cape, and really thinking about strategies to increase the economic possibility around agriculture in these areas, and generally not a lot of comments, and I will say some general consensus around the remainder of what was on that board. Downtown Hyannis. Thank you. Yeah, again, similar to the other groups, thinking about focusing on the needs for the average resident who may be living downtown. Those sort of everyday types of uses, for example, a grocery store, because if you're required to get into your car and go to the grocery store, you're reinforcing that auto reliance, which living in a walkable compact center is, you're supposed to have the advantage that you don't have to rely on your car. Really thinking about creating, again, sort of building on the idea of design guidelines, building a cohesive style, thinking about how to balance sort of environmental and aesthetic concerns relative to building materials. And then we talked a lot about activating public spaces. So when we talk about open space, not just a passive open space, but interactive places that host events, activities, for example, food trucks, and really thinking about, again, how to integrate some more of those active recreational uses, plazas, playgrounds, basketball courts, not just your typical park, but things activities and, again, whether they be events or activated public spaces especially for families. We also talked about, setting a higher expectation for new development in terms of incorporating amenities up front. So asking them to affirmatively incorporate into development at the beginning opportunities for again, amenities and enjoyment of outside spaces integrated within developments, whether it's integrated within a building footprint itself, like a rooftop deck or a community garden, but thinking, again, so it's not just public spaces, but these are integrated into development as they come online. And again, the sort of the middle one resonated as well, continuing to assess challenges to development and allowing enough sort of flexibility in our regulations for them to respond to sort of the changing nature of the markets, of infrastructure challenges as they come up. And that's downtown Hyannis. Thank you, Jim. Our commercial nodes, which again are those sort of distinct non-village, non-regional centers. Sort of the overriding theme here that we added in was really thinking about the individuality of each one of these areas. I know we're sort of talking about them collectively, but they each have their own character. They each have their own potential. We like the idea that they could be more sort of whole neighborhoods, walkable, cohesive, but that might apply very differently on the Route 6 interchange than it would to Bell Tower. So, the idea that we do want design guidelines and we do want sort of thought going into each one of these areas, but really making sure that we're looking at each one of them individually, incorporating public input, and looking at their sort of individual economic potential. Is that all? Oh, one. Oh, two more. Okay. Village centers, full disclosure, we definitely ran out of time on this one, but we sort of talked in the beginning how definitely, a much less development potential inherently in our village centers, that anything that happens there should happen at a much smaller and village scale. Again, this idea of definitely wanting to preserve the design there, talking about how to support small businesses there with reasonable and tasteful signage. And finally, we talked about our regional economic center, and again, the overriding theme here was connectivity. The main strategy being that we really need to think about doing sort of a separate and individual master plan for this area that the town proactively puts together with the community and says, this is what we want and these are our expectations for the area. Instead of just reacting to development to come in, let's look at our land use, let's look at our infrastructure, let's look at especially connectivity, integrating our streets and bike paths, both externally and internally within each other, and really sort of setting an expectation for development, thoughtfully considered and planned, I think was Mr. Twist's words, I think which sort of sums up, I think, the opportunity here. All right.
What's next?
Just want to check in with Jim and Kate. Do we have any wrap-up consensus?
So just
Next steps?
Yeah, so real quick for next steps. So we're going to type up all these suggested edits and we'll get it out to the committee for any additional comments before we finalize and put it back into the land use chapter for final review. Obviously, you have a draft chapter in front of you tonight. I don't think the expectation was to go into too much detail on the chapter itself. This is the first opportunity for you guys to review that chapter further. We'll incorporate the edits here, so please feel free to offer any comments, suggestions, and also those at home, please do not hesitate to send suggested edits as well. And at this point, I think we're going to transition over to housing and Elizabeth Jenkins.
Thank you, Jim. We wanted to at least introduce the topic of housing tonight. We know this is very closely integrated with the larger conversation about land use and growth in the town. But I think we saw a lot of examples of sort of policies and strategies that integrate both, again, this larger town-wide conversation about growth and, potential housing strategies going forward. But we wanted to at least sort of talk a little bit about our housing production plan. It is one of the required things that the Cape Cod Commission says you must have as part of your local comprehensive plan, is specifically a housing production plan. Talk about the work we've done on updating our existing 2016 housing production plan so far. I'll run you very quickly through some of the highest level and I think most impactful numbers and demographics around housing. Talk a little bit about our existing toolbox and strategies for dealing with housing, and then, again, run you through sort of our preliminary housing production plan goals and strategies. So, again, the housing production plan, and I think our strategy from sort of a technical perspective is really, a housing production plan is a separate independent plan that the Commonwealth requires. They have certain things that certain content that you must integrate into your production plan. But we really want to think about this as a chapter of our local comprehensive plan and make sure that it's fully integrated into, again, our overall policy when we talk about housing, land use, infrastructure, and growth. So these are the required elements of a housing production plan per the Commonwealth. You have to have this needs assessment. You have to look at what your community needs are relative to housing. And I forgot to say, a housing production plan focuses specifically on the production of affordable housing within your community. So as we've approached it, we've sort of broadened the conversation a little bit. But I should step back and say that it really is focused on creating that traditional deed-restricted affordable housing, getting to that 10% number that we hear so much about, at least 10% of the housing units within your community being on the inventory, on the subsidized housing inventory, and qualifying as affordable. So again, yep.
So that's a state requirement.
Under Mass General Law, Chapter 40B, they direct all communities to reach that goal. They set that goal for all the communities, and then they require you to adopt a housing production plan, both the needs assessment and then the subsequent plan to say how you're going to reach that 10% goal. So what we've done so far on the housing production plan, we started this update in 2022 with our housing needs assessment. We were just ahead of the 2020 census data, so we've held it back, and now we've updated all of the data in our initial needs assessment with the latest numbers from the 2020 census.
Can I ask you a quick
Oh, of course,
question?
Lisa.
Sorry, I didn't
No.
want to interrupt you. I know you were going to.
Please do.
But I was going to say 10%, I know that's the let they want us to get to.
Yep.
But that seems very, very ridiculously low.
Yep, and when we look at some of the numbers about
Over
the need,
300 families in the
Yep.
emergency shelter system that don't have beds because they're on a wait list. So I just wanted to ask about that because there's a real need for it.
absolutely. Give me one slide, and I'll get us to the numbers, which I think really speak to again. I think the breadth of need relative to housing. So we have done some community engagement. We did a survey. We talked to 51 individual people in focus groups, and we held 2 community workshops. The main themes coming out of those conversations were that moderately priced and deed-restricted housing is in very short supply. Really need to think about increasing the supply of housing. Groups most in need, seasonal workers, young adults, seniors. When we look at what's preventing an increase in housing supply, wastewater constraints and zoning came up as systematic barriers. That the town needs to look at public-private partnerships as an opportunity to bring more housing in town. We need to look at streamlining development processes and consider more programmatic approaches. So here we go, Asia, the numbers in terms of demographic changes between 2010 and 2020. We saw the number of households within the town of Barnstable decrease by 3%, but we saw the total population increase by 8%. The proportion of adults 60 and over increased to 30% of our population, and 7 out of 10 residents are living in 1 or 2 person households. So again, what we're really seeing is a shift. And what this says to me is really looking at a need for, again, more diverse and smaller housing options. If 7 out of 10 people are living either by themselves or with only 1 other person. Demographic profile, 1 in 5 residents in the town of Barnstable identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. In Hyannis, that number is 46.6% of our population. So we're a very diverse community. 17% of our community was born outside of the United States, and in 20% of our households, English is not the primary language that is spoken within the home. So this really, again, talks about how we need to think about diversifying our communication strategies. More than 1 in 10 Barnstable residents have some form of disability, especially within our senior population. And 60% of our residents have an educational attainment that is less than a bachelor's degree. Our housing profile, 81% of our existing stock is detached single family, so a standalone single family on an independent lot. 70% of our housing stock is home ownership. That is significantly more than we see across the Cape and across Massachusetts. And this number is really hard to pin down, but if we look at the actual data, it shows us that at least 1 in 3 units, housing units in the town of Barnstable is seasonally occupied. I think that feels low to me, but that's what the numbers say in the census. In terms of housing affordability, we all know this. We have all seen this. Housing affordability has skyrocketed over the past 3 years. This was at the end of 2022. Median price for a single-family home was $615,000. Again, we see that number fluctuate up and down. Median price for a condo, $295,000, and there's not a great source for a median for an average rent. But at the time, and again, this was about 6 or 8 months ago, our consultant sort of did an informal survey and estimated an average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment at about $2,500 a month.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Do we have an estimated average mortgage payment?
I don't, but we can talk about cost burden, which gets to that, which is the next slide. And I personally think this speaks to what Asia is saying, and these numbers are incredibly impactful. So when we talk about cost burden, it means a family or an individual that's spending 30% or more of their total monthly income on housing costs alone. So 37% of all households in the town of Barnstable are cost burdened. So 37% of people living here are paying more than 30% of their income on housing. Of our low and moderate income households, so those households that are making 80% or less of the area median income, almost 3 out of 4 of those households are cost burdened. So 72% of our low and moderate income residents, households, are cost burdened. And of all of our households in the town of Barnstable, 17% are severely cost burdened, meaning they're paying more than 50% of their total household income only on housing alone. So we have 48,000, almost 50,000 people who live in this town. At least 17% of those, half of their household income is going to housing alone. I'm always asked about what the gap is. What are the numbers when we talk about needing to increase supply? What are we talking about in terms of goals? This number I don't think represents that, but I wanted to at least put it up there as the latest data that the Cape Cod Commission produced as part of their regional housing strategy. So they ran population projections for the Cape, and again, this is not for Barnstable, this is regionally, on the high and low level. And this looks at not just year-round population, but all population in the town of Barnstable. So again, they looked at sort of a standard population projection and a high-level population projection, and estimated that we need by immediately between 13 and 16,000 more housing units by 2023, that the Cape needs between 13 and 20 more housing units, and looking out to 25, between 11,000 and at a high-end scenario, 21,000 more housing units. So when we look at our supply and our demand, again, this does incorporate that sort of insatiable seasonal demand that we see here. So I just want to qualify these numbers with that. So just want to take just a moment and talk about our approach to housing here today. Really, when we think about approaching what we call the housing crisis, we categorize that into 4 areas, which is creating new housing units, increasing the supply, making our existing housing units more affordable to residents, maintaining what we have in terms of affordable housing. So we do this through rehabilitation of our existing housing, monitoring our existing units to make sure that they're income qualified tenants. And as properties are foreclosed or turn over, making sure we maintain them as part of our stock. And absolutely collaboration with the state. We're a housing choice community. We get a lot of grant money from them, with the county and with nonprofit organizations. So when I think about our strategies today, I group them into 3 buckets: planning, policy, and zoning, local initiatives and programs, and then capacity coordination and education. So zoning, as we've talked about, it really is our primary tool to regulate land use and growth within the town of Barnstable, primary tool to implement our land use policy objectives. Zoning regulates the location, rate, and character of new development, but as we've heard, it can also be a barrier when it's unpredictable or unresponsive to the markets. Zoning can be sometimes a detriment and not a solution. So 2 of the major zoning amendments that we passed, as we talked about last time, accessory dwelling units by right in the town of Barnstable, as well as the Downtown Hyannis Zoning Initiative, which was focused on by right, compact, mixed-use development within downtown Hyannis. Under the bucket of subsidy and incentives, I would say the sort of the most powerful tool we have is our Affordable Housing Growth and Development Trust. This is a 5-member board that is funded primarily through Community Preservation Act funding that provides gap financing for developers who are looking to produce affordable housing. They also do, pre-development or other sorts of loans or grants to support affordable housing in the community. But, the trust is primarily constrained by having just that one funding source, Community Preservation Act funding, which really limits, again, what they can do. A trust can be, a very powerful organization. They can buy land, they can develop land, they can sell land, they can loan. So really thinking about how to best utilize that trust and diversify those funding sources is something that we think about going forward. Also thinking about how we can do I have it on there? How we can do more sort of direct assistance programs to residents. So individual, we're really reaching the need of individual residents through something like rental assistance or first-time home buyer. In downtown Hyannis, we have the Housing Development Incentive Program, which is a tax relief program to support new market rate development that is coming online that would not otherwise pencil out without some sort of subsidy. And again, we have a state housing choice designation, which means we are following state level best practices for housing and meeting benchmarks for housing production. And that comes with a wide variety of technical assistance and grant money to support everything from infrastructure to planning for housing going forward. Under this bucket of local initiatives, really looking at using municipal land for affordable housing is another very effective strategy. Why do we do this? If we give away the land, it's one of the major components of adding to the cost of housing. So it defrays the cost of development. It's a contribution that makes certainly a deeply subsidized affordable housing project financially feasible. We can create affordable housing on our terms, so we can think about density and design and make sure that it's responsive to the needs and interests of our community and fits within the character of an area. So actually just at the last town council meeting, the town council approved the sale of a just shy of an acre lot in Marston's Mills that we affectionately call the House on the Hill. That was declared surplus to Habitat for Humanity. So it's a great example of one of those partnerships for 2 affordable homes in that walkable village center. We're also doing a master planning process for the Barnstable Adult Community Center that looks at the potential for infill there. We are just about to embark on a master planning process for the Marston's Middle School to think about what the potential there is to support village-based housing. And we have a number of other properties that we have looked at or hope to look at in the future to be able to think about how we can best utilize the land that we own as a municipality to support housing. And then, of course, we have a whole sort of internal technical program that looks at maintaining these existing housing units. I do like to talk about this because, as many of you know, we don't have a housing coordinator. And so I've learned personally firsthand the very heavy lift relative to the administration of affordable housing. Is very resource intensive, especially at this scale. So quickly, I want to run through the initial goals that were drafted for the housing production plan. The first one, again, is the most obvious and requisite goal of a housing production plan, which is having at least 10% of your housing stock on the subsidized housing inventory, identifying that housing should be affordable and year-round, and targeting especially seniors, families, both rental and ownership, and thinking especially about those with special needs. But again, to Asia's point, it's not just about deed restricted units on the subsidized housing inventory. It's about seasonal and year-round options especially for our workforce, and more diverse options accessible even to moderate income families and individuals within our community. So our number, our SHI number currently, subsidized housing inventory number currently, is 6.78%, meaning we need plus or minus 700 additional units in order to meet our goal. And as we know, as we invite more development into Barnstable, that number, that number changes. But that is our current SHI number. So additional goals, and this one really comes back to the heart of sort of integrating our land use planning, our land use master planning, thinking about, where and how are we going to support new housing in our community, and really thinking about reflecting our smart growth policy, protection of natural resources, putting an emphasis on reusing vacant and underutilized property, and locating near transportation infrastructure and in locations as consistent with our LCP. So you see that very clear. Specifically calling out the need not just for subsidized housing, but in thinking about how we stabilize housing for those with the most housing insecurity, whether it's through housing assistance programs for residents that are living in inadequate housing additions, homelessness, at risk of homelessness. So sort of a different category of housing need and strategies there. And then these are sort of our community-based goals, again, enhancing that local capacity, whether it's within our own staff or with partnerships regionally to be able to implement housing initiatives, and then, partnering to promote public awareness of both the crisis, the numbers that are out there, continuing to research need. We all know the housing market is extremely dynamic and it changes. We're in a very different place now with interest rates as we were, with new development coming online than we were a few years ago. So this is definitely an area where we feel like we need to pay constant attention. Strategies, again, that were drafted in our HPP in those three buckets as before. Planning, policy, and zoning strategies. These are two sort of policy strategies that have stood out. We talked about them as recently as the last town council meeting, looking at tax exemptions for year-round rentals. We talked about setting our residential tax rate, but we know if you're a homeowner renting out your house, even if you're renting it year-round, you're still paying what a seasonal resident would be. So we had some recent legislation that allowed communities to do this as a special option. So thinking about how do we do that, and maybe even is there an enhanced version of that when we passed our accessory dwelling unit ordinance. It really sort of took a lot of interest out of our accessory affordable apartment program, which was really the only way to create an ADU prior to that zoning change, was to deed restrict it affordable. Maybe there can even be, a tax exemption plus, at a higher rate if you're willing to commit to renting your ADU year round at an affordable rate. Another thing we're seeing a lot is the ability to put year-round deed restrictions on property. We've heard a lot about Provincetown doing this, or other communities, Tahoe, Vail, who have programs where they actually purchase a year-round deed restriction, maybe for somebody who's aging out of their house, but they want to see it. They want to see it stay a year-round as a housing unit that will be year-round. So not restricting, not a deed restriction based on affordability, but restriction based on tenure, how long somebody will live there. This would have to be home rule petition, not currently allowed. Zoning solutions, again, I think we talked, sort of set the stage for some of those tonight. Village scale, mixed use, multifamily development in locations as we develop appropriate through this process. And then again, thinking about not just the single family home on the lot, but those missing middle and living little housing types. So whether it's a 2-family dwelling or that sort of cottage colony, how do we integrate that into our existing landscape in a way that respects our neighborhood character and our historic traditions. Wrapping up, a couple of more here, looking at our inclusionary ordinance. So for new development, all developments of 10 units or more must provide at least 10% of those units as deed restricted affordable housing. But as we saw, that's the bare minimum. It's only getting us to the goal. It's not ticking up on that subsidized housing inventory. So there's been a couple of cases where the town council has negotiated that up to 13%. Should we be doing that across the board? Should we be looking at different requirements for different locations? Where are we incentivizing development? Should it be more or less? We know development at different scales. If it's a small sort of local infill project, 1 or 2 deed restricted units is, can be a lot to administer. Whereas if you're looking at a 200 unit project, you have more room to spread those out. So should there be different tiers within our inclusionary ordinance? And also, when doesn't it make sense to have on-site affordable? A lot of inclusionary ordinances require or allow for a fee in lieu option, so you can pay your way out, which would be a good, now that we have an active trust that again is looking for diversified funding sources. Looking at that as an option as well. And then some strategies to think about, again, how do we target those underutilized properties, whether it's for unique zoning, but where, again, looking at points, perhaps on Route 28, where do we have underutilized properties that, that we could give a density bonus or something like that to promote more housing. So local initiatives and programs, again, we talked about using underutilized municipal property, keeping an eye on short-term rentals and their impact on our year-round housing stock, currently monitoring all short-term rentals in the town of Barnstable, where they are, how often they're rented. So keeping a close look on that data and see how it overlaps with the potential to take units out of again that year-round housing stock. Working more on direct assistance programs. Again, this is that rental assistance or first-time home buyer. And thinking about, again, as we've talked about here, how do we coordinate the rollout of new infrastructure with housing, or how do we support infrastructure in places like our growth incentive zone to make sure that those sites are primed for housing. A great example of this is we recently got that brand new Housing Works infrastructure program grant to support build out of the sewer system on the west side of Hyannis, and that's going to support a plus or minus 50 unit affordable home ownership project by Housing Assistance Corporation. And again, these are some of the capacity coordination research strategies. Once we have these programs in place, we have to make sure we're out there promoting them and people know about them. So, again, a marketing, if you've talked to me about housing at all, or really anybody in our office, we're talked about a shared regional housing service office. So taking some of that administrative burden away from individual towns, some of that really technical work, and having more regional support for it. Again, coordinating all of our committees that are focused on housing, our LCP, our planning board, our housing committee, our trust. Let's make sure we're all talking to each other, sort of with the same information and advocating. And I've covered diversity too, the housing trust. So it's just sort of an intro to what we've done so far on housing production plan. Again, we'll pick this up next time, hopefully with somebody, an outside expert that can give more of a state level perspective and start to think about how we develop some of those goals and integrate them into our plan, as well as matching up with what's in our current HPP.
Wow.
Is that a lot? I talked for a long time.
Just talk fast. So, Elizabeth, how many units of housing are in the pipeline that you know about?
Yeah, I should have put that slide up. A considerable amount. Kate keeps that spreadsheet. She might know the exact numbers better than I do. Oh, she's going to pull it up for me. So, we have had, after sort of 10 years of almost no production, we have seen a huge amount of interest, primarily in primarily in rental housing, which is what our last housing production plan said. So, we were really following the recommendations that are in that plan. We keep a multifamily residential tracking sheet so we can keep track of how many are coming online and what the numbers are. Kate is so kindly pulling that up for all of us. And maybe she can zoom in a little so I can
Because
see it.
even if we reach 10%, I mean, that's an arbitrary number.
An arbitrary number.
That-
Yeah, and really it's designed to give us what they call safe harbor, so the ability to deny a 40B development if it comes through, which is, we definitely want that local control over where our housing goes. But at the same time, we know that we want to be encouraging housing. So how do we keep that in balance? Kate, can you start at the bottom and then we can go up on this? So since 2017, and that number is a little bit arbitrary, but that's really when we started to see projects come online and we started this count. We've permitted 460 new units of housing. These are occupied and in construction. The biggest chunk of that is Everly, Cape Cod. That's a 230 unit project, but you can see filled in by a lot of smaller infill development types of projects. Many of them in downtown Hyannis, but a number of them, a couple in Centerville and a couple in that regional economic center. Kate, if you can go up. Projects that we have currently under construction, another 339 units. The bulk of this being the New England Development Hanover Hyannis project. That's 272 units. We expect that to be occupied. I think probably they're a little bit behind, but certainly in the spring of the new year. So that is, again, 272 units, 36 of those affordable. So that's 13% of that development at a range of AMIs. Projects that we have permitted but not yet started construction. Kate, if you can go up, 193 units. These look like, again, very, small scale infill projects within the growth incentive zone. Direct result really of the new zoning that we saw, projects that were in the pipeline. These are a lot of residential conversion, a lot of residential and office conversions. So the biggest one there being 201 Main Street, which was the redevelopment of the Cascade Motel. And then projects in the pipeline. So these are projects that have filed for site plan review, but have not received permits yet. 619 in the pipeline. So these are at all stages, of review. The biggest chunk here being the proposed 312 units over at 35 Scudder, which has applied for its Conservation Commission permitting and site plan review, but we have not seen any other applications for that. We also have the 307 Main Street project here in downtown Hyannis, and then we have varying proposals for the dockside, the former dockside property. And then a few, again, smaller scale infill type of projects. But you can see, I think if we add up the total affordability, we're hitting about 10% overall for those projects. So a considerable number of units in the pipeline going forward, which is why really we're thinking about strategies, again, that focus, less on market rate rental housing and more on how we think about home ownership, family, affordable home ownership, housing for families, because we're getting a lot of those great 1 and 2 bedrooms, but less for people who are living here with families year round.
Can I just say one thing? So great numbers. I'm glad to see the numbers, but realistically, 65% of the AMI is not really affordable. That's almost $3,000 for a 1 bedroom.
Yeah.
So you're really not, it's great, but not really doing much for the people that are really in need.
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean,
Devastating
especially our
emergency
80, I mean,
shelters.
65% is great that we have our inclusionary. At 65, most people do 80, so the town was very forward-thinking in setting it that low. But yeah, when we look at the 80%, that's, that's $75,000, I think, for two people. We're looking at buying down units for people to be able to afford at the 80%. So those AMI numbers jumped up like 30% after COVID. We did not see people's wages jump up 30% after COVID. So there's a real mismatch there. Doesn't really reflect our seasonal workforce at all. All right.
Any other questions?
I have one. What is the role of Barnstable Housing Authority?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I wish I understood sort of housing authorities more. They are a separate organization that is enabled under a separate section of the Commonwealth's rules and regulations. So while they're affiliated with the town, and there's some level of collaboration. They are an independent entity that manages and maintains public housing stock that they own, mostly rental housing stock that they own throughout the town of Barnstable.
And do we know, like, how much they own? I mean, like,
Yes.
how do they fit into these numbers?
That's a great question. Mainly, they have been focused on maintaining their existing stock and not developing new, but we can pull out those numbers. I think I have them, but I don't want to miscite them. I will bring them to the next meeting.
If I could speak on that too, they do maintain a stock of available land to be developed. It's just there's a lot of potential conflict of interest. They don't really have they're already somewhat short-staffed. They don't have the ability to really develop that, and they do still work with private landlords in order to assist families, and they do have their own pay scale per se, very much like fair market rents that they follow very strictly.
So yeah, I'm sorry, I should have said they maintain an existing stock of public housing and they administer a voucher program. So those are their sort of primary buckets. Our primary relationship with them, at least in planning and development, is we work with them very closely on our community development block grant allocation. We probably do a project a year with them focused on rehabilitation of existing public housing.
So we've been here 2 hours. Is there anything else? We can go on to the next item on the agenda, which is general correspondence. Anybody want to correspond with us? Okay. And now public comment. Do we have any public comment? You're good? Y'all got it all out of your system during our breakouts. Great. Okay. So our next meeting is scheduled for January 25 in 2024 at 5:30 p.m. There was some conversation about polling us to see if we might squeeze another meeting in between now and then. So I guess staff will send us a survey and see if we can just keeping this thing on track, and we don't want to forget everything that we just learned tonight after the holidays, so okay. Any other matters to come before us that were not anticipated to be listed on the agenda? Nope, we're good. And do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second, so moved. Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you.